The mist crawled across the forest floor like ghostly fingers, weaving between ancient oaks that had witnessed centuries of secrets. Autumn had painted the woods in amber and crimson, but this morning, everything was shrouded in pearl-gray fog that muffled sound and distorted distance. I pulled my threadbare jacket tighter around my shoulders, feeling the damp chill seep into my bones as I gathered herbs along the forest's edge. Today marked the autumn equinox, when the veil between worlds thinned, or so my grandmother had always claimed. In our small village of Ravenwood, nestled between mountains and forest, the day brought solemn ritual. Every eligible woman would present herself before the village elders, hoping to be chosen as this year's harvest maiden, an honor that guaranteed prosperity and protection for one's family through the harsh winter ahead. "Ilara, you shouldn't wander so close to the boundary," called Margot, the butcher's daughter, her voice cutting through the silence. Several other young women glanced up from their own gathering, their eyes quickly passing over me as if I were merely another tree or stone. I'd grown accustomed to being overlooked. Since my grandmother's death last spring, I'd become nearly invisible in Ravenwood. Without her respected position as the village healer, I was just the odd girl with pale blonde hair who knew too much about plants and too little about proper conversation. The daughter of a mother who had fled into these same woods 16 years ago, never to return. My fingers closed around my grandmother's pendant, a small silver wolf with amber eyes that hung from a leather cord around my neck. "Trust what you feel, not what you're told to see," she'd whispered the night before she died, pressing the necklace into my palm. It was warm against my skin now, almost pulsing with its own heartbeat. As the others drifted back toward the village path, I lingered, watching the mist swirl in hypnotic patterns. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving within the fog, deliberate and graceful. A wolf, larger than any I'd ever glimpsed during my forest excursions, its silver-gray coat almost indistinguishable from the mist itself. Only its eyes marked it as real, amber like the stone in my pendant, glowing with an intelligence that froze me in place. Our gazes locked, and something passed between us, recognition, though I couldn't understand how. The wolf turned and padded deeper into the fog-laden forest, then paused, looking back as if waiting. "Ilara, the ceremony begins at noon," Margot called again, her voice now distant. But the wolf was moving away, and with each step, I felt the pendant grow warmer. Before I could reason with myself, I was following, drawn by something beyond conscious thought. The forest thickened around me, the mist cocooning us both as I tracked the wolf's silent form, deeper than I'd ever ventured before. The sounds of the village faded entirely. Time seemed to stretch and distort in the fog, minutes bleeding into what could have been hours. The wolf remained just ahead, appearing and disappearing like a spirit guide from the old stories my grandmother would whisper on winter nights. Stories the village priest had condemned as dangerous superstition. Then the wolf stopped in a small clearing I'd never seen before, where ancient stones formed a rough circle. As I stepped forward, the mist suddenly swirled violently around the animal's form, obscuring it completely. My heart hammered against my ribs as the fog shifted, condensed, and then, impossibly, began to take a new shape. Where the wolf had stood now, stood a man. Tall and imposing, with shoulders broad enough to block out the weak sunlight filtering through the canopy. His hair was the same silver-gray as the wolf's coat, though streaked with darker strands at his temples. But it was his eyes that confirmed what my racing heart already knew, amber, almost golden in the diffused light, regarding me with the same intelligence I'd seen in the wolf. I should have run. Every rational thought screamed danger. Yet I remained rooted, the pendant burning against my skin like a brand. "You followed?" he said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying the texture of authority that expected, demanded obedience. Few would have the courage. Words failed me. This was madness, surely, or perhaps I'd eaten something poisonous during my gathering and was hallucinating. The man, the wolf, whatever he was, wore clothing that seemed both ancient and timeless. A black tunic embroidered with silver thread in patterns that resembled the phases of the moon, leather breeches, and boots that rose to his knees. Around his shoulders hung a cloak of deepest gray, clasped with a silver brooch shaped like a wolf's head. "Your pendant," he continued, nodding toward my grandmother's necklace. "It marks you as one who belongs to the old ways, to my people." "I belong to Ravenwood," I managed finally, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "My grandmother. This was hers. I don't know what you mean by your people." His laugh was low and without humor. "Ravenwood exists because we allow it to. Your village sits on the edge of territories far older than human memory." He studied me with unnerving intensity. "What is your name?" Something warned me against offering it too easily. Names held power in the old stories. "Ilara," I answered after a moment's hesitation, then found courage from some hidden reserve. "And you? Do wolfmen who appear in fog have names?" A flicker of surprise, then appreciation, crossed his features. "I am Thorn, king of the Blackwood Pack, and you, Ilara of Ravenwood, with your grandmother's pendant and your courage, have wandered into matters beyond your understanding." As if summoned by his words, other shapes began to materialize from the mist. Men and women with the same predatory grace, their eyes reflecting the dim light like polished gemstones. Some regarded me with open curiosity, others with undisguised hostility. "The choosing approaches, my king," said a woman with hair like midnight and eyes cold as winter. She looked at me as one might examine an insect before deciding whether to crush it. "This human should not be here." "She wears the mark of the Allied, Serena," Thorn replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The old treaties still stand." A murmur rippled through those gathered. I clutched the pendant tighter, its warmth now the only familiar thing in a world suddenly turned upside down. "The elders never told us," I whispered. "About your kind." "Of course they didn't," Thorn said, stepping closer until I could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his body. "They've spent generations trying to forget, to pretend the old bargains were merely stories. But the forest remembers, even when humans choose to forget." I thought of the autumn equinox ceremony waiting back in the village, of the harvest maiden who would be chosen. The weight of unspoken history pressed down, and suddenly the ritual seemed less benign, more ominous. "What bargains?" I asked, dreading the answer yet needing to know. Thorn's eyes gleamed. "Once, your village offered tribute on the equinox. The chosen maiden would cross the boundary to live among us for a year and a day, ensuring peace between our kinds. In return, we protected your lands from those far worse than wolves." Horror bloomed inside me. "You mean the harvest maiden ceremony is a pale shadow of the true choosing," he finished. "Your people broke faith 3 generations ago, when fear overcame wisdom. They kept their daughters home, built their boundary stones, and pretended we were merely legend." His gaze dropped to my pendant. Not all agreed with this decision, it seems. My mind raced to my grandmother, to her strange knowledge and the respect tinged with fear that villagers had shown her, how the elders had whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, saying she kept one foot in the old world. "The pact must be renewed," said another man, broader than Thorn, with russet hair and a scar running down his jaw. "The darkness grows beyond the western ridge. Without the bond, we cannot hold it back from human lands." "The girl could be the one," offered a younger woman, her eyes not unkind as they assessed me. "She found her way here, after all." "No," I protested, finding my voice at last. "I need to return to the village. They'll be looking for me." Though even as I said it, I wondered if that were true. Would anyone notice my absence from the ceremony, or would they simply proceed, relieved that odd Ilara had finally disappeared like her mother before her? Thorn studied me, his expression unreadable. "You are free to leave, Ilara of Ravenwood. We do not take unwilling tributes." He gestured toward a path I hadn't noticed before. "That way will lead you home." Relief washed through me, but it was tinged with something unexpected. Disappointment? Curiosity? I hesitated, and in that moment, a howl pierced the silence, coming from far beyond the clearing. The assembled wolf people stiffened, and Thorn's expression darkened. "The Void Walkers test the boundaries," said the scarred man grimly. "They sense the weakening." "What are Void Walkers?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Creatures of endless hunger," Thorn answered, his voice tight. They consume not just flesh, but spirit, memory, the very essence of life itself. For centuries, the power of the bond between human and wolf kind kept them confined to the darkest reaches. But with each passing year that the pact remains broken, their prison weakens. The pendant seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. I thought of Ravenwood, of children playing in the village square, of the elders with their stubborn pride and carefully maintained ignorance, of my grandmother, who had tried to prepare me for something I'd never understood until now. Another howl rose, closer this time, answered by growls from several of Thorn's people. "Go home, Alara," Thorn said, though something in his tone had shifted. "Warn your elders if you wish, though they will likely dismiss your words as madness. The choice of action, or inaction, is theirs, as it has always been. I should have run then, should have fled back to the familiar confines of the village, to the ceremony and its false promise of security. Instead, I found myself asking, and if I stayed? If I chose to honor the old pact?" Thorn's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise I'd seen cross his features. "You would live among us, learn our ways. Your presence would strengthen the boundaries that hold back the darkness." His voice lowered. "It is not an easy path. You would walk between worlds, belonging fully to neither, like my grandmother had, like my mother had perhaps tried to do." "I need time," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "to decide." "Time is the one luxury we have little of," Thorn replied. "But until sundown, the choice remains yours. After that, the equinox passes, and with it, the opportunity to renew what was broken." As if to emphasize his words, a third howl echoed, this one sending chills down my spine with its unnatural timbre. It sounded wrong, somehow, hollow and hungry at once. "I'll escort you to the boundary," said the younger woman who had spoken kindly before. "My name is Lyra. It's safer if you don't go alone, not with the Voidwalkers testing their chains." I nodded, unable to form more words as the weight of decision pressed upon me. As we turned to leave, Thorn called my name. When I looked back, something like reluctant admiration showed in his amber gaze. "Whatever you decide, you've shown more courage than your village has in generations. Your grandmother would be proud." The mention of her sent a pang through my heart. I fingered the pendant once more, remembering her final words, "Trust what you feel, not what you're told to see." As Lyra led me back through the mist, the warmth of the wolf pendant never faded, even as the certainties of my former life dissolved like morning fog beneath the rising sun. The village was in chaos when I returned. The ceremony had been delayed, elders pacing anxiously while mothers clutched their daughters' hands. I slipped through the crowd largely unnoticed, my absence apparently less concerning than the ominous clouds gathering on the horizon, dark and unnaturally fast-moving, tinged with a sickly green that made the air feel charged and heavy. "There you are," said a voice, and I turned to find Mara, the herbalist's apprentice. Unlike the others, she had always been kind to me. "Elder Cyrus has been asking about you." My stomach tightened. Elder Cyrus, with his stern countenance and eyes that seemed to cut through pretense, had been my grandmother's most vocal opponent in village matters. "Why would he ask for me?" I whispered as she pulled me toward the village hall, a stone building that served as the center of Ravenwood's governance. "He says there are signs and portents," she replied, her voice low, animals behaving strangely, the fog lingering past midday. Some of the hunting parties reported sounds from deep in the forest. Her eyes flicked to my pendant before quickly looking away. "He says it's like the old days before my grandmother's time," I finished, understanding blooming like a cold flower in my chest. Inside the hall, the 5 village elders sat in a semicircle, their faces grave in the flickering torchlight. The oldest among them, Elder Cyrus, looked up as we entered, his rheumy eyes focusing on my pendant with an intensity that made me instinctively cover it with my hand. "Ilara Reed," he said, my name sounding like an accusation on his lips. "Come forward." The room was eerily quiet as I approached, aware of whispers starting behind me. Mara squeezed my arm once before melting back into the small crowd of onlookers. "Where were you this morning?" Elder Cyrus demanded without preamble. "Gathering herbs at the forest's edge," I answered, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. "Only at the edge?" asked Elder Meredith, the only woman among the village leadership. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Your boots tell a different tale, child." I glanced down at my mud-caked boots and the hem of my dress, stained with the peculiar silver-blue moss that I now realized must grow only in the deeper parts of the forest, near where I'd met Thorn. "I may have wandered further than intended," I admitted. The fog was disorienting. "And did you encounter anything unusual in your wanderings?" Elder Cyrus pressed, leaning forward. "Or anyone?" My heart hammered against my ribs. They knew something, or suspected. I thought of Thorn's words about the broken pact, about the darkness growing beyond the western ridge, about the choices made by these very elders or their predecessors. "I saw a wolf," I said finally, deciding on another half-truth. "Larger than any I've seen before." A visible ripple of tension moved through the elders. Elder Cyrus and Elder Meredith exchanged a loaded glance. "And did this wolf communicate with you in any way?" asked Elder Thomas, the youngest of the five, his brow furrowed. "Wolves don't talk," I replied, forcing a bewildered laugh that sounded hollow even to my ears. "It was simply an animal in the forest." Elder Cyrus studied me for a long moment before sitting back, his gnarled hands gripping his walking stick. "The ceremony will proceed at sunset," he announced. "All eligible maidens will participate, including you, Alara Reed." "I'm hardly eligible," I protested. "My grandmother—" "Your grandmother is gone," he cut in sharply, "and her proclivities need not determine your path. You are of Ravenwood now, fully and only." The emphasis on the last word sent a chill through me. He knew, or at least suspected, far more than he was saying. I thought of the Voidwalkers, of the true meaning behind the Harvest Maiden ritual, and wondered just how much history had been buried by those who claimed to protect us. "You may go," Elder Meredith said when I remained silent. "Prepare yourself for the ceremony. It is a great honor to be considered an honor. A pale shadow of the true choosing, Thorn had called it." I curtsied mechanically and backed away, feeling the weight of their stares between my shoulder blades. Outside, the strange clouds had blotted out most of the afternoon sun, casting the village in premature twilight. Villagers hurried to secure livestock and children, sensing the wrongness in the air even if they couldn't name its source. "What did they want?" Mara asked, falling into step beside me as I headed toward my small cottage at the village's edge. I hesitated, measuring my trust. Mara had been one of the few who'd visited my grandmother in her final days, who hadn't crossed to the other side of the street when I passed after the burial. "They're afraid," I said finally. "Something's coming, and they know more than they're admitting." Mara's eyes widened slightly. "The storms from the west. You know about them?" She glanced around before pulling me into the shadow of the communal washing area, where massive stone basins stood empty in preparation for the coming rain. "My mother was apprenticed to your grandmother before she married my father," she confessed in a whisper. She wouldn't speak of it directly, but on nights when the wind came from the west, she would make special markings in salt across our threshold and burn herbs I've never seen used in any normal remedy. I studied her face, seeing fear, but also a hunger for truth that mirrored my own. "The ceremony tonight," I said carefully. "Do you know its true purpose? Only that it's older than any of us know," she replied. "And that your grandmother once told my mother it was a broken promise that would someday need mending." She paused, then added, "The last Harvest Maiden chosen before you disappeared was your mother, wasn't it?" The question struck like a physical blow. In all the village gossip and whispered stories about my mother's disappearance, I'd never connected it to the ceremony. But now, pieces began to align with sickening clarity. "She didn't run away," I murmured, more to myself than to Mara. "She tried to honor the pact." "What pact?" Mara's question hung between us, heavy with implications. Before I could decide how much to reveal, a commotion erupted from the village square. We hurried toward the noise to find a hunting party returning, half carrying one of their own. Jensen, the tanner's son, his face ashen and body trembling despite the blankets wrapped around his shoulders. "Something attacked them near the western ridge," explained a breathless boy who'd run ahead with the news. "Came right out of the shadows," he said. "Not wolf, not bear. Something else." The pendant burned hot against my skin. Void walkers, testing their boundaries. Did anyone else see it? Demanded Elder Cyrus, who had emerged from the hall. The boy shook his head. Jensen was scouting ahead. By the time the others reached him, there was nothing there. Just cold so bitter it frosted the leaves, though the day was mild until then. Get him inside. Warm him properly, ordered Elder Meredith. She turned to Elder Cyrus, their earlier composure now visibly shaken. We cannot wait until sunset. The ceremony must happen now. As the crowd dispersed, following the hunting party and injured Jensen, I felt a decision crystallizing within me. The pendant pulsed like a second heartbeat, and my grandmother's voice seemed to whisper on the rising wind. Trust what you feel. I need to go home, I told Mara abruptly. Before the ceremony. I'll come with you, she offered. But I shook my head. No. Stay and learn what you can about Jensen's encounter. I'll meet you back here before the ceremony begins. She hesitated, then nodded, squeezing my hand once before heading toward the healer's cottage, where they would have taken the injured hunter. My own cottage stood slightly apart from the others, nestled closer to the forest's edge than most would prefer. Inside, I moved with urgent purpose, gathering my grandmother's journal from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard, along with a small pouch of herbs she had set aside with strict instructions never to use them except in greatest need. The journal's pages contained drawings that now made terrible sense. Creatures of shadow and mist, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to devour light itself, void walkers. And beside them, serving as both counterpoint and barrier, wolves with human eyes, standing at ancient stone boundaries marked with symbols that matched the embroidery I'd seen on Thorn's cloak. My fingers traced the final entry, written in my grandmother's shaking hand. The balance weakens. They've forgotten the price of safety, content in their ignorance until the darkness comes again. The pendant will guide her when the time comes. May she make a wiser choice than I did, staying behind out of fear when I should have followed my heart and the old ways. Tears blurred my vision as pieces of my fractured history aligned. My grandmother had been meant to go to them, to the wolf kind, but had chosen to remain in Ravenwood. My mother had perhaps tried to correct that mistake years later, only to be prevented somehow by the elders who now watched me with such suspicion. A sharp knock at my door startled me from my thoughts. I hastily tucked the journal into a pocket sewn inside my dress and moved to answer, expecting Mara with news. Instead, I found Elder Meredith, her tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. "May I enter?" she asked, though she was already stepping across the threshold, her eyes scanning my simple home with unveiled curiosity. "The ceremony is being prepared," she said without preamble. "You will stand with the others as tradition demands." "And if I'm chosen?" I asked, unable to keep a slight tremor from my voice. Her gaze settled on me, calculating and strangely sad at once. "You won't be. The selection has already been determined. It will be Margot this year. Her father's position demands the recognition." The casual admission of the ceremony's manipulation struck me like a slap. Then why include me at all? "Appearances," she replied with brutal honesty, "and to bring certain matters to a close. Your grandmother's influence has lingered long enough." "You mean the truth she tried to preserve," I countered, anger flaring bright and sudden. "About what lurks beyond the western ridge. About the pact your predecessors broke." Elder Meredith went very still. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "So you know, or think you do. Did you venture beyond the boundary stones this morning, girl? Did you speak with them?" I raised my chin, refusing to be cowed. I saw what happens when promises are broken. The Voidwalkers grow stronger. Jensen's encounter is just the beginning. "The ravings of a confused boy," she dismissed, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "We've kept Ravenwood safe for generations without bowing to ancient superstitions. Safe because the barriers still hold," I pressed. "But for how much longer? You've twisted the choosing into an empty political gesture while the real danger grows." Her hand moved with surprising speed, closing around my wrist with bony strength. "Listen carefully, Alara Reed. Your mother thought as you do, that old bargains must be honored. that we needed the protection of those creatures. She tried to cross over without sanction, to offer herself as tribute. We stopped her then, as we'll stop you now if necessary. What happened to her? I demanded, ice forming in my stomach. Elder Meredith's expression hardened. She made her choice, as you now face yours. Attend the ceremony, accept its outcome, and embrace your place in Ravenwood, or follow her path and be considered no daughter of this village henceforth. She released my wrist and stepped back. You have 1 hour to present yourself at the village square. Choose wisely, Elara Reed. As the door closed behind her, I stood motionless, the pendant burning against my skin like a brand. Through the window, I could see the strange clouds had now engulfed the entire western sky, and with them came a wind that carried the scent of decay and emptiness. The hour of decision had arrived sooner than Thorn had warned, forced by powers beyond any of our control. In that moment, with my grandmother's journal heavy in my pocket and my mother's fate a specter hanging over my future, I knew with sudden clarity what I must do. Not for Ravenwood, which had never truly embraced me. Not even for Thorn and his people, still strangers despite the pull I felt toward their wild nature. But for the truth, buried beneath generations of fear and denial. For the balance that needed restoration before shadows consumed us all. Outside, the village bell began to toll, summoning everyone to the square for a ceremony built on lies. I turned instead toward the forest edge, where mist was gathering once more between ancient trees that remembered pacts made and broken by creatures both human and other. I had a different ceremony to attend, a true choosing to make before the sun abandoned us completely to the coming night. The forest welcomed me with eerie silence. The usual chorus of birds and insects hushed as if holding their collective breath. Mist curled around my ankles, thicker than natural fog, almost sentient in the way it seemed to guide my steps deeper into the trees. Behind me, the village bell continued its summons, growing fainter with each step I took away from Ravenwood. I clutched my grandmother's journal in one hand, her pendant in the other, letting its warmth lead me toward the clearing where I'd met Thorn. The path seemed both familiar and strange, as if the forest itself was shifting around me, testing my resolve, or perhaps protecting me from pursuit. I wouldn't go that way, said a voice, startling me to a halt. A woman stepped from behind a massive oak, her auburn hair braided with small bones and feathers, her clothing a patchwork of leather and furs that blended seamlessly with the forest. Though she appeared human, something in her fluid movements and amber eyes, so like Thorn's, marked her as one of the wolf kind. The Voidwalkers have breached the outer perimeter, she continued when I remained silent. The king sent me to find you, if you chose to return. I'm Elara, I offered, not knowing what else to say. I know who you are, pendant bearer, she replied with a hint of impatience. I am Nora, hunter of the Western Watch. Come, we take a different path. She moved without waiting for my response, sliding between trees with a grace I struggled to match. As we traveled, the forest grew denser, older, trees twisting into shapes that seemed more deliberate than natural. Symbols had been carved into their trunks, spirals, crescent moons, and patterns that matched those in my grandmother's journal. The elders know, I said, as we ducked beneath a fallen log shrouded in luminescent fungi, about the pact, about what's coming. They stopped my mother when she tried to honor the old ways. Nora glanced back, her expression unreadable in the fading light. We know. She reached the boundary stones before they caught her. Called for us, but by their laws, we cannot cross uninvited except at the equinox, and even then, only to receive a willing tribute. What happened to her? I asked, the question that had haunted me for 16 years, finally spoken aloud to someone who might actually know. Nora paused, compassion softening her predatory features. They took her back to the village. Later, we heard she'd been sent away, exiled to one of the coastal settlements where the old knowledge has been completely lost. The king sent scouts, but she shook her head. The trail went cold. The revelation struck like a physical blow. All these years, I'd imagined my mother dead or transformed somehow by her encounter with the forest's secrets. To think she might be alive, might have been forced to build a life far from both her home and the truth she'd tried to honor. She could still be alive, I whispered, hope and grief tangling in my chest. Perhaps, Nora conceded. But that is tomorrow's question. Tonight, we face more pressing concerns. As if summoned by her words, a howl echoed through the trees. Not the clean, natural sound of a wolf, but something distorted and wrong, like a voice crying out underwater. Nora stiffened, her hand moving to the bone-handled knife at her belt. We must hurry, she urged, resuming our journey at a near run. They're closer than they should be. We emerged into a different clearing than the one where I'd met Thorn. This space was larger, dominated by a circle of standing stones twice the height of a man, each carved with the same symbols I'd seen on the trees. In the center burned a massive bonfire, its flames unnaturally white with veins of blue and silver dancing within. Around the fire gathered Thorn's people, some in human form, others as massive wolves, all with the same alert tension as they watched our approach. Thorn himself stood before the largest of the boundary stones, his silver-gray hair gleaming in the firelight, his expression grave until his eyes found mine. Something like relief flashed across his features before he mastered it. You came back, he said simply when I reached him. I found my grandmother's journal, I replied, drawing it from my pocket. She knew about all of this, about what the village elders had done. Thorn nodded, unsurprised. Rhea was meant to be our chosen 3 decades past. When she refused at the last moment, choosing to remain in your village instead, the pact began to weaken. Rhea? I blinked in confusion. My grandmother's name was Agnes. A murmur rippled through the assembled wolf-kind. Thorn's gaze intensified. Among humans, perhaps. But she was born Rhea, daughter of our previous chosen and a man of your village. Half wolf-kind, half human, as your mother was after her, as you are now. The revelation struck me speechless. My fingers instinctively found the pendant. Its familiar warmth suddenly explained, not just a token or symbol, but a birthright. The blood has thinned through the generations without renewal of the pact, continued Thorn, but it remains. It's why you could see me in my wolf form when others would glimpse only shadow, why you could follow where the boundary would turn most humans aside. My mind reeled with implications. My grandmother, Rhea, had been half wolf-kind, choosing to deny that heritage to remain in Ravenwood. My mother had tried to reclaim it, and been exiled for her choice. And what does that make me? I whispered. 1/4 wolf-kind by blood, answered the woman who'd spoken kindly in our earlier meeting. Lyra. Enough to sense us, to see beyond the veil most humans accept as the entirety of existence. Not enough to shift forms as we do. But enough to stand as true chosen, Thorn added, if that is your decision. The equinox grants us this one night when the boundaries between worlds grow thin enough for new bonds to be forged, or old ones renewed. Another distorted howl pierced the night, closer this time, answered by growls from several of the wolves surrounding us. The white flames of the bonfire dimmed momentarily, as if something had passed between it and the stars. They sensed the ceremony beginning, said the broad-shouldered man with the scarred jaw whom I now recognized as Thorn's lieutenant. We must hurry, my king. Thorn's amber eyes never left mine. The choice must be freely made, Nolan. While there's still a world left to choose in, Nolan countered grimly. I looked around at these people, my people, in some partial inherited way, at the boundary stones that had stood against darkness for generations. At the village in the distance, where bells had stopped ringing and silence hung ominous in the air. If I agree, I said slowly, what happens? Do I stay with you forever, never returning to the human world? For a year and a day, as the old pact decreed, Thorn answered. You would live among us, learn our ways, add your strength to the boundaries. After, you would be free to choose, return to your village, remain with us, or walk between worlds as guardian of both. And if I refuse, I had to know all paths before choosing one. His expression darkened. Then we fight the darkness alone, for as long as we can. Your village might have decades yet before the barriers fail completely, or mere days, if what approaches now breaks through tonight." As if to emphasize his warning, the shadows between the trees seemed to deepen, coalescing into forms that hurt the eye to look at directly, elongated limbs, bodies too thin to support life, faces that seemed more absence than presence. "Void walkers," gasped Lyra, moving to stand protectively near me. "They shouldn't be able to come this close to the heart circle. The pact has weakened too far," Nolan growled, his form already blurring at the edges as he prepared to shift. "Even the equinox power wanes." Thorn stepped forward, placing himself between me and the approaching shadows. "Your decision, Alara," he said, his voice gentle despite the tension thrumming through his powerful frame. "But make it now." In that moment, the pendant burned hot enough to sear, and the journal in my hand fell open to a page I hadn't seen before. My grandmother's handwriting, shaky but determined, formed words that seemed written directly to me across time. The choice I could not make, the truth I hid from even my daughter until too late. Let these be burdens you need not carry. The wolf's heart beats within you, however faintly. Deny it, and part of yourself dies. Embrace it, and both worlds may yet survive the coming void. I closed the journal and tucked it safely away. "I choose to honor the pact," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I will be your chosen." Relief and something more complex passed over Thorn's features. He extended his hand, palm up. "Then let us begin before it's too late." I placed my hand in his skin burning hot against my own, as if a fever raged beneath the surface. He led me to the center of the stone circle, where the white fire cast strange, dancing shadows across the ancient carvings. "The ritual is simple," he explained, as his people formed a circle around us, some human, some wolf, all with eyes that gleamed like polished gemstones in the firelight. "Your blood, freely given, mixed with mine. Your pledge, spoken beneath stars that witnessed the first pact centuries ago. The equinox power will do the rest if enough remains." From his belt, he drew a small ceremonial knife with a handle carved from what appeared to be moonstone. "Are you certain, Alara? Once begun, this cannot be undone." I thought of Ravenwood, of the false ceremony likely concluding even now with Margot's predetermined selection, of Elder Meredith's warning and the fractured history that had led to this moment across 3 generations of my family, of the darkness pressing against ancient boundaries, hungry for the light and life they protected. "I'm certain," I said, holding out my palm. The knife's edge was so sharp I barely felt it slice across my skin. Blood welled immediately, shockingly bright in the white firelight. Thorn made a similar cut across his own palm, then clasped my hand in his, our blood mingling as he began to speak in a language I didn't recognize, guttural yet musical, like water flowing over stones. The fire surged higher, and the air around us seemed to thicken and swirl. My pendant burned with such intensity I feared it might blister the skin beneath. Yet the pain was secondary to the strange sensation spreading through my body from where my blood met Thorn's. Heat raced along my veins, bringing with it heightened awareness. Suddenly I could smell everything. The rich loam beneath our feet, the sweat and musk of the wolf kind surrounding us, the cold emptiness of the void walkers pressing against the boundary's edge. My hearing sharpened until I could detect the individual heartbeats of those closest to us, each slightly different in its rhythm and colors. The world suddenly contained shades I had no names for, existing in the spaces between what my human eyes had always perceived. "Speak your pledge," Thorn instructed, his voice seeming to come from both outside and within me simultaneously. "Claim your place as chosen." The words came without conscious thought, as if they had always existed within me, waiting for this moment. By blood inherited and freely given, I bind myself to the pact. For a year and a day, I stand between worlds, guardian of boundaries both seen and unseen. Let what was broken be mended through me. Let what was forgotten be remembered. As the final word left my lips, the white fire exploded upward in a column of flame that momentarily outshone the stars themselves. A shockwave of power radiated outward from our joined hands, rippling through the stone circle and beyond, into the forest. Where it touched the lurking shadow forms, They recoiled with silent screams that somehow echoed in my mind rather than my ears. The boundary stones began to glow with symbols that had been invisible before, intricate patterns of protection and power that spiraled and pulsed with renewed energy. The Void Walkers retreated further, their twisted forms dissolving into the natural darkness of the forest as the unnatural cold they brought with them dissipated. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the supernatural display subsided. The fire returned to normal proportions, though it continued to burn with unusual white-blue flames. The boundary stones settled into a subtle luminescence rather than their previous brilliant glow, and my hand, still clasped in thorns, no longer bled. The cut had sealed itself into a thin silver line that I somehow knew would never fully fade. "It is done," Thorn said, his voice rough with emotion I couldn't fully identify. "The pact is renewed." The wolf kind around us broke into celebration. Howls from those in wolf form, cries of triumph from those who remained human. Nolan clapped Thorn on the shoulder with unrestrained relief, while Lyra approached to examine my palm with wonder. "The strongest bond I've seen formed in my lifetime," she murmured. "Look how the mark shines." I stared at the silver line across my palm, still trying to process the changes within me. Everything felt simultaneously sharper and more dreamlike, as if a veil had been partially lifted from my senses. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my newly sensitive ears. Thorn's expression was solemn despite the celebration around us. "Now you become one of us, while remaining yourself. The hardest path, to walk between worlds without losing yourself in either." Before I could respond, a commotion at the edge of the clearing drew our attention. Nora, who had been standing guard, approached with urgency. "Humans from the village," she reported. Armed and approaching fast, they crossed the outer boundary moments after the ritual concluded. Thorn's expression hardened. "How many?" "A dozen. Led by their elders. They carried torches and iron weapons. A raid, then. Not a peaceful delegation. I thought of Elder Meredith's warning, of my mother's thwarted attempt to honor the pact. History preparing to repeat itself. "They're coming for me," I said with certainty, "to stop what they think I've done." "They're too late," Nolan growled. "The pact is sealed, but they don't know that," I countered. "They'll see only what their fear allows them to see. Their missing villager among monsters from old stories." Thorn studied me, something like pride flickering in his amber eyes. "What would you have us do, Chosen? They are your people too." The question settled on me with unexpected weight. My first decision as bridge between worlds, with lives hanging in the balance. The wrong choice could spark conflict between village and wolf kind that would weaken the very boundaries we'd just strengthened. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the pendant's warmth spread through me like courage. "Let me speak to them," I said. "Alone at first. Perhaps they'll listen to one of their own." Murmurs of protest rose from several of the wolf kind, but Thorn silenced them with a gesture. "The Chosen has spoken. We honor her wisdom." To me, he added more quietly, "But we will be watching, ready to intervene if they threaten you." I nodded, grateful for his trust and protection in equal measure. As I moved toward the edge of the clearing, where torchlight now flickered between distant trees, I felt the weight of both worlds settling on my shoulders, the first step on a path that would lead me places I couldn't yet imagine, but which had perhaps been my destiny since before my birth. Behind me, the white fire burned steady and strong. Ahead, the uncertain confrontation with a past built on fear and denial. And somewhere beyond both, a future waiting to be written by choices yet unmade. I walked alone to meet the approaching villagers, leaving the protective circle of stones and wolfkind behind. The forest felt different now, alive in ways I'd never perceived before, whispering secrets in a language I was beginning to understand. My enhanced senses detected the villagers long before they came into view. The acrid scent of pitch-soaked torches, the metallic tang of iron weapons, the rapid drumming of frightened hearts. Elder Cyrus led them, his weathered face set in grim determination. Behind him came Elder Meredith and a group of Ravenwood's strongest men, including Margot's father and Jensen's older brother. Their expressions ranged from fear to righteous anger as they spotted me emerging from the mist. "Ilara Reed," called Elder Cyrus, his voice carrying authority despite his age. "Step away from this cursed place and return to your people." I stopped several paces from them, conscious of the silver mark on my palm and the subtle changes the ritual had wrought in me. Could they see the difference? Would my eyes now reflect torchlight like a wolf's? "I am where I belong," I answered, striving for calm. "There's no need for weapons or threats. What's done was necessary, to protect all of us." "Protect?" Elder Meredith stepped forward, her face twisted with scorn. "You've doomed us by awakening old superstitions better left buried. Did you complete the ritual? Did you give yourself to these creatures?" The disgust in her voice stung, but I held my ground. "I renewed a pact your predecessors broke out of fear. The same fear that drives you now. The Voidwalkers have returned. You've seen the signs." Jensen's encounter at the Western Ridge was just the beginning. Murmurs rippled through the group. Jensen's brother shifted uncomfortably, his knuckles white around his axe handle. "She speaks of demons and monsters," Elder Cyrus declared. "The ravings of a mind contaminated by her grandmother's madness." "Then explain the unnatural storms," I challenged. "The fog that lingers past midday. The cold that froze leaves in autumn warmth. These are not natural occurrences." "And you think sacrificing yourself to wolf demons will save us?" demanded Margot's father, brandishing his torch higher. "Not demons," I corrected. "Guardians of a boundary most of you have forgotten exists. They've held back true darkness for generations, while Ravenwood turned its back on ancient promises." Elder Meredith's eyes narrowed. "Just like your mother. She too was seduced by these wild delusions." "My mother tried to honor the truth you buried," I replied, anger finally seeping into my voice, "and you exiled her for it, separating her from her child, from her home. Was protecting your comfortable lies worth that cruelty?" The accusation struck home. Several villagers exchanged uncertain glances, their resolve visibly weakening. "The girl may speak some truth," ventured one of the older men, the blacksmith whose wife had once been my grandmother's close friend. "My Elise used to say Agnes, Rhea, she sometimes called her in private, knew things about the forest that kept us all safe." "Superstition," spat Elder Cyrus, though with less conviction than before. "Old women's tales. That brought your hunting party here tonight," I pointed out. "If you truly believed them meaningless, you'd have dismissed Jensen's encounter and continued your false ceremony without concern." Before any could respond, a bone-chilling howl cut through the night. Not from behind me where Thorne's people watched and waited, but from beyond the village itself. Another answered from a different direction, then another. Wrong sounds, hollow and hungry. The blood drained from Elder Meredith's face. "What is that?" "Voidwalkers," I said softly. "Testing new boundaries now. The ritual pushed them back from the forest's heart. But they seek other paths, weaker boundaries. Like those around Ravenwood," finished the blacksmith, his expression grim. "We should return to the village," urged another man. "Protect our families. The wolf kind can help," I offered. "The renewed pact gives them strength and purpose, to guard not just their territories but the human lands that border them." As it was always meant to be, Elder Cyrus's face contorted with conflict. Decades of certainty warred with the evidence of his senses as another unnatural howl echoed, closer to the village than before. "And the price of this protection?" he finally asked. "Already paid," I answered, holding up my palm where the silver mark gleamed in the torchlight. "I stay with them for a year and a day, learning their ways, strengthening the bond. After that, I may choose my path, and our part in this bargain," Elder Meredith pressed, practical even in her distrust. "Acknowledgement, respect for the boundaries, a return to certain observances at the changing of seasons." I paused, then added firmly. "And the truth, taught to your children and theirs, so this knowledge is never again buried out of fear." The howls came again, multiplying and converging toward the village. Several men shifted nervously, looking back the way they had come. "We have little choice," admitted the blacksmith, "if what she says is true." "A demonstration, perhaps?" suggested Elder Meredith, her shrewd eyes fixed on me. "If these allies are as powerful as you claim, let them prove their worth against what approaches now. It was a test, and a fair one. I turned slightly, knowing Thorn could hear every word with his enhanced senses. Will you show them? I called into the mist. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, like shadows solidifying, Thorn emerged from the trees, flanked by Nolan and two massive wolves, one gray, one russet. The villagers gasped, some raising weapons instinctively, others backing away in terror. Lower your iron, Thorn commanded, his voice carrying such natural authority that several men complied before catching themselves. It has no power against what truly threatens you tonight. As if to punctuate his words, another chorus of hollow howls rose from the direction of Ravenwood, closer still, and carrying an edge of anticipation that chilled the blood. The Voidwalkers circle your home, Thorn continued, addressing Elder Cyrus directly. They sense the equinox power that once kept them at bay has returned, but they seek weaker points to breach. Your village stands exposed. And you would defend it? Elder Cyrus asked, skepticism warring with desperate hope in his aged voice. It is part of the pact your ancestors made with mine, and which has been renewed tonight through your daughter's blood. Thorn's amber gaze shifted to me briefly, before returning to the elder. We are bound to protect what lies within our territories, which includes Ravenwood, whether you have acknowledged it or not. Another howl, so close now that even the villagers with ordinary hearing tensed in recognition of the threat. A child's distant cry carried from the village, followed by shouts of alarm. "They're there already!" gasped Elder Meredith, her composure finally cracking. "Not for long," Thorn promised grimly. He turned to me, something like tenderness briefly softening his stern features. "Your first night as chosen brings an unusual duty, Alara. Are you ready to stand between worlds as the pact demands?" I swallowed hard but nodded. "What must I do?" "Channel the boundary's power through your blood. Our blood, now mingled," he explained, taking my marked palm in his. "The pendant will focus it. When we reach the village, you'll feel it. The weak points in the natural barriers. Direct us there." To the stunned villagers, he commanded, "Return to your homes. Gather in the village center. Light fires of rowan and pine if you have them. And speak no invitation aloud to anything that calls from the darkness, no matter what beloved voice it may mimic." The urgency in his tone finally penetrated their fear and doubt. With minimal protest, the hunting party turned back toward Ravenwood, moving with haste born of growing terror. Elder Cyrus lingered a moment longer, his rheumy eyes fixed on me with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Regret, perhaps, or the belated recognition of a truth too long denied. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said finally, the admission clearly costing him. Then he too turned away, following his people back toward a village now visibly under siege. In the distance, unnatural shadows slipped between cottages, elongated forms flickering in and out of torchlight like negative images. Screams mingled with those hollow, hungry howls as villagers caught glimpses of what hunted them. "Now," Thorn said. And suddenly the clearing filled with wolves, at least 20 powerful forms emerging from human shapes in rippling transformations that defied natural law. Thorn alone remained in human form, his hand still clasping mine. "We hunt together, chosen," he said, his voice rough with the effort of maintaining this shape while his nature called him to shift. "Guide us to where the barriers thin most." As we approached Ravenwood at a pace I could never have matched a day earlier, I felt the pendant grow warm, then hot against my skin. Instinctively, I raised it in my free hand, watching in wonder as it began to glow with the same white-blue light as the ritual fire. Knowledge flooded me, not in words, but in sensations. I could feel the ancient boundaries now, invisible lines of power that had once encircled Ravenwood completely, but now showed gaping weaknesses like tears in fabric. Through these, the Voidwalkers squeezed their twisted forms, bringing soul-deep cold and hunger that consumed more than flesh. "There!" I pointed toward the village well, where shadows writhed most densely. "And there!" The old burial ground beyond the chapel. "And there!" The crossroads where the village borders met the forest path, the weakest points, where boundaries between worlds had worn thinnest. Thorn raised his head and released a howl that was answered immediately by his pack. They split into groups, racing toward each location with supernatural speed, not attacking directly. They were outnumbered still by the Voidwalkers that had breached the village, but strengthening the boundaries through their mere presence, their connection to the pact I now embodied. Where they passed, the shadows recoiled, their hollow forms unable to maintain cohesion against the renewed power of the ancient guardians. Villagers who had huddled in terror behind locked doors watched in disbelief as massive wolves drove back creatures from nightmare, herding them toward the village boundaries and the strengthening barriers beyond. At the well, where the largest concentration of Voidwalkers had gathered, Thorn finally released my hand and completed his transformation. The sight stole my breath. His massive wolf form stood taller than any natural wolf, silver-gray fur gleaming with inner light, amber eyes burning with power and purpose. He moved with lethal grace among the shadow creatures, his very presence forcing them back toward the breach they had created. Guided by instinct and the pendant's pull, I followed, feeling the pack's power surge through my veins. Where I walked, the ground seemed to remember old protections, boundaries reforming in my wake. The Void Walkers sensed it, turning their eyeless faces toward me with hatred and hunger. One lunged, faster than thought, elongated limbs reaching for my throat. Before I could even scream, Thorn was there, his massive form intercepting the creature with deadly precision. Around us, the pack closed ranks, forcing the remaining shadows into an ever-tightening circle. I raised the pendant high, feeling rather than hearing words form in my mind. An incantation older than the village, older perhaps than human memory. As I spoke them aloud, the pendant's glow intensified until I stood in a column of white-blue light that spread outward like ripples in still water. Where the light touched the Voidwalkers, they dissolved like mist before strong sunlight, their hollow howls fading into the night. Where it reached the village boundaries, old protections flared back to life, invisible to most human eyes, but I could see them now, patterns of light and energy that matched the carvings on the boundary stones in the forest's heart. Thorn's howl of triumph rose above the chaos, echoed by his pack from every corner of the village. The shadow forms retreated before the renewed barriers, driven back toward the darkness beyond the western ridge from which they had emerged. As suddenly as it had begun, the attack was over. Silence fell over Ravenwood, broken only by the frightened whimpers of children and the crackling of torches. Villagers emerged cautiously from their homes, staring in wonder and fear at the wolves who now stood sentinel at key points throughout their community. Thorn returned to my side, shifting back to human form in one fluid motion. His eyes blazed with something deeper than triumph as he looked down at me. "The Chosen has claimed her power," he said simply. "Both worlds stand protected tonight." Dawn broke over Ravenwood with unusual clarity, the air washed clean of both physical mist and the metaphysical taint the Voidwalkers had brought. I stood at the village's edge, watching as residents emerged cautiously from their homes, their faces marked with the bewildered exhaustion that follows terror. Thorn stood beside me, once again in human form, though many of his pack remained as wolves, patrolling the reinforced boundaries with tireless vigilance. We had spent the night strengthening weak points, my newly awakened abilities guiding his people to where the ancient protections needed renewal. "They'll need time to accept what they've seen," Thorn observed as Elder Cyrus organized a village assembly in the square. "Generations of denial cannot be undone in a single night." "But they can't return to ignorance," I replied, watching as mothers held children close, as men spoke in hushed tones of shadows that had moved with terrible purpose. "They've glimpsed what lies beyond the comfortable boundaries of their understanding, as have you," he said, his amber eyes studying me with something like concern. "How do you feel?" The question gave me pause. How did I feel after a night that had transformed not just my place in the world, but my understanding of myself? The ritual had awakened senses and abilities that still felt foreign, yet somehow right, like remembering something long forgotten, rather than learning something new. "Different," I answered honestly. "More complete, somehow, as if I found a piece of myself I never knew was missing." Thorn nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "The wolf blood awakens. It runs thin in your veins after generations without renewal, but it is there, and now it's remembered." My fingers found the pendant, its familiar warmth now a constant companion. My grandmother, Rhea, she must have felt this too, but chose to deny it. Out of fear, Thorn acknowledged. And perhaps love for the human man she chose. The path between worlds is never easy, Ilara. Few have the strength to walk it without losing themselves to one side or the other. From the village square, Elder Meredith's voice rose as she called for order. The villagers were gathering, their faces turned expectantly toward where the elders had assembled on the steps of the meeting hall. Soon, explanations would be demanded. Truths would need to be spoken after generations of deliberate forgetting. "They'll want me there," I said, straightening my shoulders, "to explain what happened, what will continue to happen." Thorn's hand closed briefly over mine, his touch sending a current of warmth up my arm. "Remember who you are now, Chosen. Neither fully theirs nor fully ours, but a bridge between. Speak your truth without apology." I nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. As I moved toward the assembly, villagers parted before me, their expressions ranging from awe to lingering fear. I felt their stares like physical touch, some noting the silver mark on my palm, others whispering about how my eyes seemed different in the morning light. Elder Cyrus met me at the hall steps, his face haggard from the night's events, but his eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them, as if a veil had been lifted. "The people need answers," he said without preamble, "about last night, about them." He gestured toward where Thorn waited, a respectful distance from the gathering but still visible to all. "I'll tell them what I can," I replied, "but some truths may be harder to accept than the danger they faced." "Truth often is," the old man conceded with unexpected humility. "That doesn't diminish our need for it." I took my place beside the elders, facing the assembled village. Familiar faces looked back at me. The blacksmith and his wife, Mara and her parents, Jensen still pale from his encounter, but standing tall beside his brother, even Margot and her father, their previous disdain replaced by uncertain respect. "Last night," I began, my voice carrying further than it once would have, "Ravenwood faced an enemy it has pretended doesn't exist for 3 generations. The Voidwalkers, creatures of endless hunger that consume not just flesh but spirit and memory, tested boundaries weakened by our village's broken promises." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but no one interrupted. The evidence had been too clear, the danger too immediate to deny. Those promises were made centuries ago, when our ancestors first settled these lands. They recognized they built their homes in territory already claimed, not by other humans, but by the wolf kind who had guarded these forests since before human memory. I gestured toward Thorn, who inclined his head slightly but remained where he stood. Several villagers shifted nervously at the reminder of his presence. "A pact was formed," I continued. "Every year at the equinox, a chosen from our village would cross the boundary to live among the wolf kind for a year and a day, strengthening the bonds between our worlds and maintaining the protections that kept darker forces at bay. The Harvest Maiden ceremony," whispered Elder Meredith, realization dawning in her eyes. "A shadow of the true ritual," I confirmed, "preserved in form, but stripped of meaning when fear overcame wisdom 3 generations ago. My grandmother was meant to be chosen, but she refused, choosing to remain in Ravenwood instead. The pact began to weaken then. My mother tried to honor it 16 years ago, but was prevented and exiled for her attempt." I met Elder Cyrus's gaze directly, letting him see the knowledge and hurt this truth carried. To his credit, he did not look away. "Last night, I renewed the pact as it was always meant to be. My blood, which carries traces of both human and wolf-kind heritage through my grandmother, has restored the ancient boundaries. The Voidwalkers have been driven back, but they will continue to test our defenses. They hunger for what we have: life, memory, the light of consciousness itself." "And these wolf people, they'll protect us?" asked Jensen's father, skepticism warring with desperate hope in his weathered face. "As they always have," I answered. "Even when we forgot our part of the bargain. But the protections are stronger when the pact is honored. When understanding flows between our worlds instead of fear. What happens now?" Mara asked, stepping forward from the crowd. "You said you must go with them." "For a year and a day," I confirmed. "I'll learn their ways, add my strength to the boundaries, become the bridge our village has lacked for too long. After that time, I'll return, at least to visit, to ensure the knowledge isn't lost again." "And in exchange," pressed Margot's father, ever practical even in the face of the supernatural. I smiled faintly. Ravenwood acknowledges the truth, honors the boundaries, returns to certain observances at the changing of seasons, not the empty ceremony we've preserved, but true recognition of our place in a world more complex than most have allowed themselves to see. The discussion continued as villagers asked questions, voiced concerns, struggled to integrate new understanding with lifelong beliefs. Some embraced the revelations with surprising readiness, particularly those who had glimpsed the Voidwalkers most clearly. Others remained skeptical despite the evidence of their senses, clinging to the comfort of denial even as they accepted the necessity of change. Through it all, I felt myself standing apart in a way I never had before, still connected to these people who had been my only community, yet seeing them now through eyes that perceived more than just their physical presence. I could sense the subtle currents of emotion flowing through the crowd, smell fear and wonder and reluctant acceptance mingling in the morning air. By midday, practical matters had taken precedence. Damage from the night's events needed repair. New protections, both physical and symbolic, were discussed with a seriousness that would have been unthinkable just days before. I found myself consulted repeatedly, villagers who had once looked through me now hanging on my every word as I explained what my grandmother's journal and my new instincts suggested would strengthen their safety. As the sun began its westward journey, I felt a familiar presence approach. Thorn had maintained his distance during the assembly, allowing Ravenwood to process change at its own pace. Now he stood at my side as I finished advising the blacksmith on symbols to forge into the new village gates. "It's time," he said quietly. I nodded, feeling both reluctance and anticipation twist within me. This village had been my only home, yet had never truly embraced me until now, when I was leaving it behind, at least temporarily. "I need to gather a few things," I replied, "and say proper goodbyes." My cottage seemed smaller somehow when I returned to it, the simple furnishings and humble possessions belonging to a different life. The life of a girl who had never followed a wolf into the mist or renewed an ancient pact with her blood. I collected little. My grandmother's journal, a change of clothing, a pressed flower my mother had left behind that I'd kept all these years. The rest could remain, waiting for a return that suddenly seemed both certain and impossibly distant. Mara found me there, helping to wrap the few items in a bundle for easier carrying. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her smile was genuine. "I always knew you were meant for something extraordinary," she said, embracing me fiercely. Though I admit, becoming the bridge between humans and wolfkind wasn't quite what I imagined. I laughed softly, returning her embrace. "Nor I. Will you look after the cottage, and perhaps continue gathering the knowledge? Someone needs to keep the truth alive here while I'm gone." "I will," she promised solemnly. "My mother has already started teaching me what she remembers from your grandmother. And Elder Meredith, of all people, has offered access to village records that have been sealed for generations." The news surprised and pleased me. Perhaps change was possible, even among those most resistant to it. "I'll send messages when I can," I promised, "and return when the year and day are complete." "We'll be waiting," she assured me, "all of us now." The village gathered again to witness my departure, no longer with suspicion or fear, but with a strange mixture of respect, gratitude, and wonder. Elder Cyrus himself presented me with a token, a small carving of Ravenwood's meeting hall that I recognized as his own handiwork. "So you remember where you came from," he said gruffly, "even as you discover who you truly are." Elder Meredith stepped forward next, pressing a sealed letter into my hand. "If your travels ever take you to the coastal settlements," she said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle, "this might help you find what was lost." My heart leaped in understanding. Information about my mother, perhaps even her whereabouts. I tucked the precious paper carefully into my bundle, words of gratitude catching in my throat. As the sun touched the western horizon, painting the autumn forest in gold and crimson, I walked to where Thorn waited at the village boundary. Behind him, several of his pack had gathered in both human and wolf forms: Lyra, Nolan, Nora, and others whose names I would soon learn. My new community, waiting to welcome the bridge between worlds. "Ready?" Thorn asked, his amber eyes reflecting the sunset's fire. I turned for one last look at Ravenwood, memorizing its familiar outlines now bathed in transformative light. The pendant warmed against my skin, and the silver mark on my palm seemed to pulse with anticipation. "Ready," I answered, stepping across the boundary that had once defined the limits of my world. Not as captive or sacrifice, but as chosen, embracing a heritage that flowed in my blood and a future I would help shape through choices yet unmade. As we moved deeper into the forest that had once seemed forbidden, I felt no fear, only the strange certainty that I was finally walking the path I had been born to follow. Behind me, a village awakened to ancient truths. Before me, a year of discovery and transformation, and within me, human and wolf blood mingling to create something both worlds would need in the days ahead. The mist rose to greet us as twilight deepened, but this time I recognized it as welcome rather than obfuscation, the veil between worlds thinning to admit one who now belonged to both. I followed Thorn into its embrace, not as the invisible girl of Ravenwood, but as Alara the Chosen, bridge between worlds and keeper of the pact that would preserve them both against the darkness that would always hunger for light.